Hey, good mornings, everybody. Happy Tuesday. And it is bright and freaking early, man. It's 3 a.m. here in Connecticut on the East Coast. Okay, I knew that I would be talking about Aaron Carter sometime this week. It's been the 1 year anniversary of his passing. It was on November 5th, just a few days ago. And I was waiting for the right motivation. If you watch my channel, you know that I look for stories. Mainly, I look for stories that I have some kind of similar experience, or I could share something, an opinion, experience, things I've learned. Ideally, I could share with you guys. And I was kind of waiting for that. I figured sooner or later I would see something would pop up that would give me a good idea for a video that I could share with you guys, something interesting. And I've discovered it today, and I'm really kind of amazed that this didn't occur to me sooner. The similarities between, this is going to sound crazy, but the similarities between Aaron Carter and my father, and the similarities between Prince, his son, and me and my sister. And it didn't even occur to me today. I never even crossed my mind till this morning. Okay, the article is in TMZ, and it's going to be right down below. And I saw this yesterday, and like I said, it never even occurred to me. I saw it, I was like, I don't have much to say about that yet. And it's the story of Prince visiting his father's gravesite on the 1 year anniversary. His girlfriend, Aaron's girlfriend, and his son's mother, Melanie, and Aaron's twin sister was there. And they take Prince. I think Prince he's going to be 2 in a few weeks, if I'm not mistaken. I think he just turned 1 about 3 weeks after his father's passing. And I'm surprised this never occurred to me. So as I was looking, this cute little blonde-haired kid, looking at his father's grave and counting the candles and stuff, and not really having a clue of what he's looking at. To him, it's just like another day at the park, really. And all of a sudden, it hit me. I was like, oh my God, this never had occurred to me before. So I was like, what? I had to look it up. I had to Google. I was like, how old was Aaron Carter? When he did pass away. I wanted to make sure. And he was 34 years old. And then I was like, oh my God, I do have a lot of similarities here between him. My father was 32, or actually 33 when he passed away. And I was 9 years old. So I was a little considerably older. My sister, on the other hand, was only 3 years old. And this morning, this had never even occurred to me. This all came back to me as I looked at these pictures of this little blonde-haired kid smiling and at his father's grave, and not really grasping the enormity of how this is going to affect him. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, it's like, oh my God, I got so much in common with this kid, and my sister even more. I might as well talk about that first. My sister, it affected my sister in a lot of ways. A little girl should always have her father. Daddy's little girl. And no matter how much I tried to be there for my mother and my sister, I tried to become the man of the family, because before my father passed, he said, Daryl, you're the man of the family now, at 9 years old. And that was a heavy, heavy weight for a 9-year-old kid. I didn't realize how much it would affect my sister. And I really don't feel comfortable. I'm not going to talk too much about that, because that's kind of private. Maybe in the future, and if I could talk to her a little about, give her a little heads up before I talk about it and see how she feels. But I don't feel comfortable talking about her too much in this video. Okay, so like I said, I saw him visiting the grave. And the first thing that occurred to me is when I started visiting, my mother asked me when I was 9 years old, when my father passed, if I wanted to go to the wake and the funeral. And I said no. I didn't go. And I've told my mother this, and I felt bad about this for 50 years of my life, until just recently, when I actually discussed this with my mother. I told her, I said, honestly, the reason I didn't want to go to the wake and to my father's funeral wasn't because I felt sad or anything. It was because my cousins were over. My cousins all came to our house after my father passed away, and I loved playing with my cousins and building forts and stuff. And to be honest, I wanted to hang out and build forts with my cousins, and I didn't want to get all dressed up and go to this funeral. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but this is the way, when you're that young, I don't think you really grasp the enormity. I knew my father passed away. I knew I never would see him again, and I was sad. But kids are so resilient. I'm sure you've heard that you've heard people say that, and it's true. But the things you don't really, like I said, as I looked at this picture of Prince, this little blonde-haired kid, part of me just, I feel bad for him, because it will affect him for the entire rest of his life, and probably it's going to affect him more and more. He won't realize until later. That's my opinion on this. All right, let me talk about this too. Like with his father passing, his father, passed away in the bathtub, and that's terrible. That's a harsh thing, and I'm sure he's gonna know about that when he grows up. With me, my father got terminal brain cancer when I was 9 years old. And like I said, the first time I remember looking back, and we were both in the living room. And this is when he first discovered that he had a tumor. And he was looking at the clock in the kitchen, and he was trying to see, his vision, because the tumor was in the back of his head. And I later heard the nurses whispering that it was the size of a grapefruit. And later on, they called my father a vegetable. And this is stuff that no 9-year-old kid, I hate the term vegetable. I despise, no human being should ever be called a vegetable. But I remember him standing there and putting one hand over his eye and to see if he could see. And then he put his hand over the other eye. Because his vision he was starting to lose his vision. This is right, before he was diagnosed. His vision was getting impaired. And I thought it was a game, at 8 or 9 years old. And I stood in front of him and I started doing it too, because I thought it was like some kind of game. And I look back at stuff like this, and it doesn't impact you. And I look at this little blonde hair again. I look at this little blonde haired kid, and a part of me feels so bad for him, because at this age, he knows his father isn't going to be around, but it's going to affect him so much more throughout his life. Okay. I do think that my father passing made me more dominant. I think I would have been way more submissive and less likely to stand up for myself. And that's on the good side. I think that's something that happened. I remember this. Well, I'll get into that more in a second. I remember right after my father passed, like a year in the following year, I was playing softball at school, elementary school. I was in 3rd grade, and I didn't have to go to school that day, obviously. And when I came in the next day, the kids were all so nice to me and everything, and I remembered another girl losing her father in 2nd grade. And I was at school, and they said, well, the reason she's not in school today is because she lost her father and this other stuff. And then the year later, I was that kid. I was that kid that wasn't in school. And when I came in the next day, I realized why everybody was being so nice to me. Because the year before, I was one of the kids that was in, what I'm saying? So we were playing softball, and my father tried to teach me some of the basics at 8 or 9 years old about softball, and, catching, throwing, hitting, but he didn't get into the specifics. And we were playing softball at recess, and I hit the ball, I ran to first base, and I slid into first base. And to this day, I still remember, because they started just yelling at me. Everybody else, all the other kids started yelling at me. Some were laughing, they're pointing their fingers at me. What are you idiot? What are you doing sliding? And I had no idea. And I'm just saying, it's little things like this that I've remembered my entire life. It's little things that you never guess. And like I said, as I look at this picture of this little blonde-haired kid, Prince, I know he's going to go through stuff like this, and I feel for him. I do, because it's going to be tough on him. For me, I think it made me a tougher person. And I remember the kids making fun of me. I didn't know you could overrun first base. That you're encouraged you could slide into first base, but you're encouraged to overrun it, because you have more speed. That's the one base you can't overrun. But I didn't know that. And I still remember that. I still remember that whole field of kids yelling at me and laughing and pointing fingers. And it sucked. It really, 50 years later, I still remember that, and it sucked. I joined Little League a year later. And I don't even know why, because I was terrible. My mother would go to every game. I give my mother so much credit, because she became the mother and father. She became both. And she would go to every game. And I remember her telling me later, she said to me, she said, Daryl, why don't you just quit? And I was surprised she said that. It's because I was so terrible. And I later found out that she was sitting with the other parents. And the other parents were saying, "Oh my God, that kid is so bad." I was out in right field and I was out in left field. And, the coach didn't know where to put me, and I was kind of overweight and I couldn't catch the ball, and I was just a mess. Like I said, and these are some of the things that made me tougher. They were tough things to go through, but it made me a tougher guy, a tougher person. Later on, a couple of years later, we would move to the city, to the more suburban area, not the city, but a more suburban, more urban area. And I lost a lot of weight. I grew taller. I got muscles. I had to fight pretty much every day. And it made me a much stronger, more dominant person. I think I probably would be in a much more professional, even though I was a draftsman, an architectural draftsman, I think I would have gone further in that field if my father was here. But I think I would have been much more submissive and soft if he had stayed around. Here's one other thing I want to talk about, and this changed me. I've talked about this in one other video. If you go back just a week ago, I took you guys to where I grew up, the house where I lived when my father passed away, the Rangers house at Black Rock. If you go back to that video, it's about a week ago. And right there, right in that front lawn, I'll tell you guys, it was one night after my father passed away. And my father was the park ranger, like I told you guys in that video. And he had a collection of guns. And he always had a 12 gauge loaded in the bedroom. This is one thing my father taught me: how to clean guns, how to carry guns, how to hunt, what to do with guns, what not to do. More than baseball, more than softball, more than football, I knew how to hunt, how to handle guns. And he had me shooting that 12 gauge he died when I was 9, and it knocked me on my butt. It was a double barrel 12 gauge Antonio Zoli over and under shotgun, loaded with double-aught buck. If you know anything about that's some pretty powerful stuff. I remember shooting it, and it just would blow 2 holes. We were shooting old doors, and it just blew 2 holes in the door. So this was loaded, meaning my mother's and my father's room. And I knew it was there. And, it was there just in case, because we lived in the middle of nowhere. After he passed, it was still there. My mother left it there, so it was just me, my mother, and my sister living in the middle of the woods, in the middle of this park. No street lights, a mile from any other homes or anything. And it was scary living there. This night, it was a Saturday night. I still remember this. I was probably about 10 or 11 years old. And I heard a car pull up. We were watching Love Boat on a Saturday night back in 1977, 1978. And it was about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And I'm on the floor. My mother's on the couch behind me. And we hear a car pull up. Because there's never no traffic. We're in the middle of the woods. It's very unusual to hear anything. And you hear yelling and all sorts of commotion out in front of the house. Like I said, we live in the middle of nowhere. They could just cut the phone lines and we're done for. And it's just my mother, my little sister, who's 3 years old in the crib sleeping, and me. And all of a sudden we just hear this slamming and banging. And I thought they were going to come through the front door. And it sounded like 4, 5, 6 people, like kids or something, like teenagers or people in their 20s, yelling and screaming right outside the front door. And you hear it slamming, like something being smashed. And I look back at my mother, and she's still on the couch. My little sister's in her crib, in her bedroom, sleeping. And I see my mother is just frozen, just in terror, sitting on she's not moving. And at that moment, I remembered the gun sitting in my parents' room, loaded, and right at that moment, I knew that it was up to me. If it is either I do something, they're going to come through the door. And it's up to me to defend at 10 years old, to defend my sister and my mother. So I started to get up. I remember coming up off the floor and turning around. At that point, I heard another car door. And I heard the car rev up. And they drove away as I was turning to go back to get the gun. And they drove away. It turns out it was a bunch of kids, and they beat up our mailbox with a baseball bat. And that's all it was. But, to me, it changed me. That night changed. Yeah, I've told people since then, that's the night I became a man. That changed my entire world that night. No 10-year-old should ever be put in that position, even though nothing actually happened. Thank God. It changed who I was. And these are just some of the stories. Even though that Prince is the son of a famous Aaron Carter, his uncle is Nick Carter, one of the biggest boy bands ever. This kid is still going to go through stuff like this, no matter what. There's going to be times when he's growing up in school when that all that money and his famous uncle and his famous father aren't going to mean anything. And he's going to be around a bunch of kids or another situation like this, like I just described to you, and it's going to happen. And I feel for this kid Prince. I do. I really do. It's not going to be easy. This is probably the easiest part here when he's a kid, because like I said, kids are so resilient. You don't realize how much it impacts you until later in life. In my 40s and 50s, I start to remember and realize how much it changed who I was as a person. And all I could do is I'm thankful that it made me a tougher, more aggressive, more dominant person. I just think of the good things that I believe I got from it. It made me who I am today, and I'm not angry about it. A lot of people are angry at God, or they say, why does God take, good people like my father? And I've never felt like that. I've always just thought that there was a reason for this. There was a reason he was here, and there's a reason he passed. And there's a reason it changed me into who I am now. And I don't know those reasons, but I think there was just a reason for it. I mean, everybody's born and everybody passes. Good people, bad people, the best people. It happens. So I've never really been angry like a lot of people around me are angry. They ask, why does God take good people? And I've never felt like that. I always believed there was a reason for it. And someday, when I pass, I'll probably know what that is. All right. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be back later. There's another article I want to talk about Angelina Jolie and her father and stuff her father said about Israel and all that stuff going on today. I want to talk about that. I'll be back later with another video. You guys have a good Tuesday.